All right. Just give people a few minutes to settle. Okay. Wow. This is amazing. This is how eager we all are. We're on time, and we are, after all, the old cliche, Jewish organizations. Awesome. It shows how important this really is. So, welcome to all of you. And remember, all the other wonderful sessions are being recorded, and you will have an opportunity to experience them. So I am going to welcome you. My name is Esther Enkin, and I am on the board of the New Israel Fund of Canada. And this presentation, in case you got your rooms mixed up, is with Dr. Gil Murciano of Mitvim, who will be presenting the Israeli initiative, A Roadmap for Long-Term Security. And boy, it seemed interesting 3 days ago, Gil. Now, unbelievable. So before I turn things over to Gil, I'm just going to give you a little brief outline of how the next hour will unfold. So Gil will give us a 30-minute presentation on the initiative. We will reserve 30 minutes for Q&A. And what I'll be doing is taking 3 questions at a time. And you know the old drill. Questions are an interrogative. They are not statements. We all agree. Okay. Virtual participant, and I'm very strict, asked others who've seen me in this role before. Virtual participants should submit their questions through the Q&A, and someone will bring them forward to us. And that's all the instructions. And now for the topic at hand. The Israeli initiative aims to turn the tragedy of October 7th and the ensuing war into a political turning point between Israel, the Palestinians, and the Arab world. This 3-phase roadmap stands out as the first comprehensive alternative published in Israel since the beginning of the war. It serves as a feasible policy plan for those who have long opposed the government's policies and its unwillingness to offer or even deal with political planning for the day after. And Dr. Murciano, who is the CEO of Mitvim, the Israel Institute for Regional Foreign Policies, is going to be presenting it. And his diverse experience with the geopolitics of the Middle East is the basis upon which he experiments with core concepts of global security and foreign policy. Between 2017 and 2021, he served as an expert on Israel's foreign policy and national security at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. He has served as a Fox Fellow at Yale University and still serves as a contributing member to the Israeli Arab King's College-based Enkin Fellowship Network. There are many other qualifications he has, but he needs to speak. He received his PhD from the Freie Universität of Berlin, and I'm going to just turn it over to you without any further ado, Gil.
Thank you very much. This is new for me, in NGO world, I mean, for us think tankers, you mostly get booed, basically. It's never really about clapping. Yeah, well, yeah, that's a terrific change, a blessed change, definitely. Imagine a conference on the ruins of the Be'eri, the kibbutz Be'eri, which almost quarter of its inhabitants were murdered or were kidnapped, basically, on that awful morning. A conference that brings together all the moderates of the Middle East. Israelis, a new government. I'm willing to even allow the Gantz in the center to participate. Palestinians, new emerging leadership, whether it is Dakhlan or new voices from within the West Bank. Regional partners, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Jordanian, the Egyptian, the veteran peace countries, the US, Canada, the EU, all the relevant participants basically convening together to plan a new Marshall Plan, basically, for Gaza and the West Bank, to shift from warfare into political action, to kickstart a new initiative, a new set or a new phase of negotiations that is aimed to build a Palestinian state, a demilitarized Palestinian state that would live side by side with Israel, to defeat the 2 main purposes of Hamas when they launched the barbaric attack on the 7th of October. A, to destroy any chance of Israeli-Palestinian coexistence, I would even say, let alone the settlement, and to stop normalization. We know that for a fact now from the documents apprehended in Shifa and other places, their goal was the concern about an Israeli-Saudi normalization that will change everything. You know, when we published this, I had a very good friend in mind, Eitan Haddad, rest in peace, who was, by the way, involved also with breaking the silence for many years. And I mean, for them, in many ways, most of what we do in think tanks comes from the mind. This one comes completely from the heart. And, you know, I think I take pride in being emotional about things and about those issues. But emotions aside, 24 hours after the 7th of October, we decided to establish a team that deals with the day after, bringing together some of the leading minds, and this is not a cliche, from Mitvim and also from the Israeli academia, really, the leading experts in Israel, but also former politicians, also people that are going to be part of the political system afterwards. And that specific team started working really 24 hours after after October 7th, and since then produced 8 different policy papers on issues from multinational forces in Gaza and all the way to revitalization of the PA. Try to basically, the goal was to take the hopes, the tears, the frustrations, the yearning basically, and turn it into a tangible policy plan. Maybe that's our role basically as a think tank. It's exactly to do that, to take those things and to turn them into a concrete policy plans. And the outcome is the Israeli initiative. I'm going to send you all the copy in the end. We are out of copies. It was fresh from the press, but there was also an insert in Haaretz. And since its publication, this initiative, which is basically a 3-phased roadmap that I will explain in a second what it actually entails, became a source of positive disruption, I would say, in Israel. It became the topic of a special meeting of the Knesset, together with Gilad Kariv, for those of you who are knowledgeable about, and really an incredible thinker, pretty rare today, right, in the ecosystem of Israeli politics, together with Sigalovich, together with members from the center in Israel, which is quite important, to discuss at least parts, if not the entire plan. It's also the topic of a workshop that we are going to conduct with Yair Lapid and his circle. But I think the most, and I just told one of our colleagues here, the most exciting thing that happened with this initiative is the Palestinian response. The Israeli initiative, as it sounds, was written for an Israeli audience. It is focused on the first, second, and third priority of Israelis today, to regain security. And we are talking about a long-term security. But suddenly, a week ago, basically a week after the publication of the initiative, we found a version of the initiative online in Arabic. And when we checked it, we found out that Dr. Ziad Darwish, a member of the PA, an official in the PA, decided to translate it. And when we approached him, hoping that he won't send us an invoice, basically, he basically said, look, I just wanted the Palestinians to know that there are different types of Israelis. And there are also Israelis who are thinking long-term. And since then, we see completely different reactions, both from regional actors that, as I mentioned before, are now seeing the necessity to become involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, even if they are not interested in this discomfort, you know, from an Emirati or Saudi position. But we also see a major response on the Palestinian side. So what is the Israeli initiative altogether? The Israeli initiative is, as I mentioned, is a strategic plan, which is based on 2 major logics. First of all, I mentioned the issue of security, but also the need to reappropriate practice. It is built as a bottom-up, top-down plan. We are talking about setting a political horizon of 2 states, where Israelis, Palestinians, and regional actors are committed to. But not of less importance, we understand that we don't have the luxury to wait for some left-wing government led by Zehava Gal'on and Yair Golan. Yeah, political science fiction, and we need to get serious about things. And when we get serious about things, I'm not ashamed to say, I have no problem duplicating certain logics that work for the right wing. When the right wing decided to create the crippling annexation and to create their own policy, they never really, you know, they never really created the strategic, they never created or claimed to have mandate from the public. They never came out with some strategic plan. They just started doing on the practical level. When we think still in the Israeli left about a new peace plan, we tend to look at it as, again, historical handshakes on the White House lawn, basically, going back to Rabin. And that's terrific. That's definitely a source of inspiration. You know, this political horizon is important, but the practice that shapes reality is our necessity. And what we are trying to do in this plan is to promote this idea of evolving peace. Some would say emerging peace, a huge fight in Mitvim. I'm not going to take you through it. My last week was all about that. But the idea is really basic. We need to identify a set of practical steps that has, by the way, a value in improving certain things, quality of life, you know, has a real tangible value. But more importantly, they have a long-term value in creating a two-state reality. What am I talking about here? We mentioned before the issue of Area C. Area C, for those of you who are less knowledgeable about it, is 60% of the West Bank. You know, it was supposed to be an area that would pass back to the Palestinians in a future agreement. Now, you know, I spent a decade in Berlin before coming back to Israel 3 years ago. When I left in 2011-12 to do my PhD and so on, people used to speak about Area C, even in the right wing, as a temporal control of Israel. You know, this is an area that in some point will be returned or will be negotiated, you know, will be passed back to the Palestinians. Today, the right wing are speaking about that, are speaking about an invasion, a Palestinian invasion into Area C, completely changing the narrative. So when we speak about large-scale development of Area C, that's, you know, that's a tool to solve the problems of small villages not having a school. But more importantly, it's a crucial step in order to stop settlement expansion, to keep the feasibility of forming a Palestinian state against really the prevailing wind and major forces from within the government. Smotrich specifically in his own position. But it's not just about that. Think about energy independence. This one I really like. Energy independence in the West Bank. For those of you who visited the West Bank, you know, it will solve the urgent energy problems in Nablus or the water shortages in Bethlehem. But energy independence would also create a state capacity for the PA. It would also maybe change the power relations, the dependency of the PA basically on Israel basically. So this is, you know, it sounds like it's a very technical tool, but we are talking about something that can change and create a two-state reality. And it's counterintuitive because for many years we, and I'm referring to the Israeli left, has completely, you know, we shone off from dealing with the practice. Conflict management and shrinking the conflict, if you know the Micha Goodman discussion, all those steps. Practice was the stuff that the right wing is using. We can wait for some kind of, for the right moment and keep to, we don't have this luxury. We have to affect reality immediately. One of the ideas that we promoted and worked very well with the previous government, with the Lapid-Bennett government, is the idea of building a joint mechanism to run the holy places, the Haram al-Sharif, in Jerusalem. You know, Israelis before the war used to remember the Palestinians from one Ramadan to the other, mainly when it was about conflict prevention. Imagine building a joint mechanism, Israeli, Palestinian, regional, Saudis, Moroccan, Jordanian. Yes, it solves the problem of, you know, preventing riots on the, you know, Laylat al-Qadr right now and so on. But more importantly, it provides the Palestinians a certain foothold in one of the core issues of future negotiation, Jerusalem. It allows the involvement of regional actors, practice. And here, the regional role is super crucial. Because, as I mentioned, the UAE, the Saudis, has a certain leverage, even when we speak about not political science fiction, but a more likely government that we'll see hopefully in the future in Israel. A center-left, center-right government. Because two things are important here. First of all, the ability of the UAE to influence Israeli policy today is impressive. They are punching above their weight. If they decide to downgrade relations with Israel right now, you know, I wouldn't say heads are going to roll, but it's going to hurt the center in Israel. So if they decide, for example, to conduct this project that I mentioned of large-scale development in Area C, they probably will have a better chance that if the EU would try to promote it, or even if Canada will try, and I'm not downplaying the role of Canadian policy. Where is the, oh, he's not here. Okay, but I mean, yeah. Probably hearing me probably right now. But I mean, this is, you understand that if you combine this leveraging normalization for the sake of Israeli-Palestinian conflict together with taking hold of the practice, there's something very important here. This is evolving peace. So how does the plan actually work? The first phase of the plan is half symbolic, I would even say. Symbols matter, especially in our situation right now in Israel. Not just for hope, but also to show exactly a certain progress. We start with something very basic, an international peace conference. I would even say peace and healing conference. And I know it sounds very new age, but rehabilitation just sounds too procedural. The idea is really basic. The paper was written by our policy paper, written by one of the leading experts on IPCs, on international peace conferences, Dr. Katsovich from the Hebrew U. Yeah, and the idea is a hybrid conference. So part of this conference is all about the symbols, the feeling, the atmosphere, shifting from a warfare situation into something else, I would even say. I'm not even talking right now about directly to state, but slowly towards that. So it's a kickoff of a new political process, very Madrid-like, if you remember the Madrid conference, with Shamir. It was mostly about the Stimmung, as they say in German, the atmosphere, but there's also a very tangible part to that international peace conference. And I'm going back to the idea of the Be'eri conference that I started with. It will be the first phase in a large-scale development of Gaza and the West Bank together, maybe even Otef Aza, the enveloping kibbutzes of Gaza. There's power in healing, There's a specific force in reconstruction, not reconstruction, sorry, in building anew. Because we're not trying to go back to the status quo ante, basically. We're trying to create something new in this situation. And where do we start? We start with the immediate need, building life-sustaining systems. With all the respect to all the parachuting operations, which is a great metaphor. Everybody's trying to save the day. The Americans are parachuting, the Jordanians are parachuting, the Germans are parachuting, but there's no mechanism that could actually bring them together in order to even tap into the level of need that we speak about in Gaza today. We're talking about water security, food security, sewage. We're talking about public health. For that, you need a mechanism, an international mechanism where Israel is involved in this specific process. And that's what the International Healing and Peace Conference would actually start doing. There will be a tangible value and not just a symbolic value. Beyond what they will be able to do or not to do, there's also a value in this International Peace Conference when it comes to creating a new group, international group of committed nations to the process of, resuming negotiations, Israeli-Palestinian regional negotiations. If you remember, for those of you who had dealt with the topic of the Quartet, obviously the irrelevant quartet of Russia, the UN, today really, I don't think it's, but on the ruins of the quartet, you can build a new group of international actors, including some interesting members, and I'm thinking, and I hope now, I said it in the US, it was a little bit more problematic. China, yes, as a force that could prevent Iran from serving as a spoiler. I'm even thinking Qatar. We are talking about all the relevant actors on the ruins, basically, of the quartet. It's a new level of commitment on the international level. So we spoke about the life-sustaining system, humanitarian strategy, about kickstarting a process through international peace conference. Then we move to what I think is the most important phase, building the infrastructure for the resumption of negotiation. And the name of the game in this phase, and I'm referring to a phase that would last between 1 to 3 years, so 4 to 6, basically, in the Middle East. And that's all about Palestinian statehood. Because we speak, in great length about the PA coming back. PA is not even close on the level of the capacity to maintain its control in the West Bank, let alone taking over the bubbling pot, which is Gaza today. So there's a question about what we do in the meantime. And part of it is about the multinational force, but, I'm sure that you share with me, we should not, there's no illusions about the agreement of any actors other than the US maybe to participate in such a multinational force unless it is part of an overarching plan to re-engage with the two-state solution. The regional actors won't be there. Egypt already said we are not going to be there unless at least you can promise that the PA is coming back. Same thing with Jordan, same thing with other actors. Nobody's going to rebuild Gaza. Saudis are, they have the affluence of resources, but even then, they weren't going to rebuild a major water purification system or an airport or whatever if they know that in about 2 to 3 months it's going to be bombed. They've been to this game before. So the only way out is doing it as part of a broader framework. Okay? So this is part of the issue, but it's also a lot about the West Bank and the steps that I just mentioned. The evolving piece, the practical steps that would build the legitimacy and the capacity of the PA from the ground up. We can do that. Look, I was in the Prime Minister, I was still working in the Prime Minister office in 2007, when, if you remember, the end of the Second Intifada, and the first discussions about security cooperation. Today, it seems completely logical, right? It seems as a major asset to the Israelis. My friends, probably from Breaking the Silence, would say it's a tool to preserve the deluxe occupation. Maybe so, maybe not, but it was an effective cooperation between the PA and Israel that stopped terrorist attacks, that stopped Hamas from rebuilding their infrastructure in the West Bank. It worked for 17 years. When we offered that in 2007, wow, the politicians, it was Olmert government, were crying bloody murder. I mean, are you crazy to trust the PA to take upon itself, yes, with US coordination and support, but to take upon itself the security role 2 years after the Tanzim was blowing up buses in the midst of Israeli cities? They did it, and it succeeded for many years, even until today. So that's why I'm saying it's not a question of capacity per se. We mentioned reforms, that's part of the issue. But it's also about stopping settlement activity. It's about a decision, an aware decision to stop settlement activity, which is going to be a major pill to swallow for the Israeli public, but also for the Israeli center. But things are moving in that direction. We mentioned yesterday the tragic events in Binyamin in the West Bank. Slowly, I think Israelis are learning after 7th of October that the natural affiliation of settlements with security is no longer relevant. And you might say, duh, of course. How can you even relate to it? For many years, that was the narrative in Israel. Settlements provide us with certain level of security. When now, after the relocation of forces to Kever, to Nablus, to Kever Yosef, to the Joseph tomb, on the eve of the attack on 7th of October, the gap becomes clear. So that's one of the major issues. We should also think about passing certain areas from area C to area B, meaning to Palestinian control. And only then, and this is where I kind of also disagree with J Street or other organizations, only after you were able to start creating facts on the ground, to give the Palestinian public and the Israeli public a sense of achievement, of different vector, where they could, I wouldn't say harvest the fruits of the new approach, but at least glance into a new future, only then it will be time for elections in the PA. Under the Quartet position, we can speak later on about the different details, but that's where it is, because we need to create legitimacy for the PA. We are talking about 2 years altogether. Then we are also speaking about the issue of recognition. Some of those practical steps that I relate to are political in nature. The decision, and I know it's a major topic today in Canada, in the US, of unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state, I think it's a super important step. That's why I don't want it to be conducted now and becoming an empty word or a vessel used by the right wing in order to challenge the policies of the international community towards Israel. I want it to matter. I wanted to provide a tailwind to a political effort. I wanted to provide legitimacy, external legitimacy for the PA. And then I think it should be presented as part of the process itself. During this process, I'm mentioning all the Palestinians. We also have to relate to the Israelis and their needs, especially security. Is also basically the development of what started yesterday as a ad hoc response to reality, an alliance of moderates, but this time a political front, a joint front that represents the two states and therefore allows us to deal with the Iranian threat, with Iranian proxies, to marginalize them basically. And in the process also to marginalize Hamas. We didn't speak about Hamas beforehand. Not, I have no illusion that Hamas would disappear, but to reduce its political force, of course, to prevent it from continuing governing the Gaza. This is the phase where Gaza becomes part and the PA becomes part of a mega project that we have currently in planning in the Middle East. You all know about this humongous and a little bit pretentious, I have to say, Biden plan to connect India to the Mediterranean and between the desert and the sea. It's beautiful, right? I don't know exactly who's going to sponsor it, but we are talking about a major every time we used to speak about that, when I was still an advisor to the German chancellor, somebody would come and say, but how do we do that? How we support the political development of Gaza without strengthening Hamas? It's a good question. But now, if Hamas is not there, the geopolitical position of Gaza between, on the shore of the Mediterranean turns it to a second Haifa. Same thing goes with the Jordanian, Israeli, UAE project, the Green Blue Prosperity, the idea of exchanging desalinated water from Israel for solar energy from Jordan. That's a major one. And you can include now the Palestinian in this specific process. There are chances here. If you create the specific alliance of moderates that I discussed, this is a major token for Israelis when it comes to security. And then last, we are moving to the final phase of negotiation. It's super easy, so I'm not going to... No, but the idea is an Israeli-Palestinian regional negotiation, which are based on a renewed or revised, I would say, Arab Peace Initiative. Basically the formula. An authentic and long-term incorporation of Israel into the region. In return, I don't see it as in return because I see it as an Israeli interest, but alongside the establishment of a Palestinian state. Two major spoilers, or I would say conditions, and with this I will end. The specific part. One, really? Half an hour? What, this is the first? So you know what? I'm going to take another 10 minutes. Okay. But no. I'm wrapping up. One condition, no, because, each and every one of those things, I'm going to send you of course, the initiative itself. And each one of them, you can double click and go into the policy paper that deals with a specific topic. But I can tell you that this government is a dead end. Okay, Mitvim worked with each and every Israeli government in the last decade. In some cases, really swimming against the tide, most cases. With this one, we decided that it's absolutely futile and we don't want to legitimize it in many ways. But really, it's not about my disagreement with the government policy. It's about the unwillingness of this government to have any policy, to speak about the day after in any sense or any term. So we need a new coalition, we need a new government, and we can speak later on about how it can actually work. And the second thing is Hamas. There are all kinds of plans, including presented by Canadian officials, about a future technocrat government, a Palestinian technocrat government that would include Hamas official from the political side, kind of a Brezhnev model. It won't work. These guys are not Brezhnev. They have a specific ideological direction, and they would utilize that specific composition to take over, to win popularity. The people that have to resist this specific idea is the two-state supporters. For the right wing, it works lovely, as it used to work before the war. So those are the two major conditions. And I think that right now, as I mentioned, in this crossroad, this is right now the only alternative that actually takes an outlook or actually thinks or even speak about peace or two-state solution. And I think that in the end, the strongest force promoting this idea is exactly this piece of no choice that we are currently at. In the end, we are only learning from necessity and trauma, unfortunately, at least in Israel. And this is where we are, and this is why it's so crucial. And if nothing less, for our friends in Be'eri and our friends in those specific kibbutzes that, well, in the case of my friends, sacrificed their life in order to protect their own community, we owe them the depth of long-term security and profound security. So let me stop here.
All right, that's a lot to chew on. And I will point out, Gil's going to send other versions, but if you go to Mitvim and click on Israeli Initiative, there's a wonderful 22-page synopsis, which is very clear and fleshes out some of what he said. So I'm going to take the prerogative of asking one question to begin with, and then just to remind you, I'll take 3 at a time. Our Zoom people will help me if there are questions. Please put them in the Q&A. And questions will be short and they will have an interrogative. In fact, they will eschew any opening statements. Okay, we got a deal. We're on. So, Gil, I'm going to start off just to kind of relate this back again because we are concerned about the Canadian government. There seems to be a moment where they're considering different approaches, and I can see some connections of what you talked about, the Canadian foreign policy in your initiative. Canada already does train Palestinian Authority police, has for some time, which speaks to a strengthened PA. Canada is involved and engaged with the question of reform of UNRWA, which would be involved in rebuilding and reconstruction. And there are places where Canada is already a player and acts in other ways. So how important is a country like ours, it's a middle power after all, in these matters?
I think that this is actually very interesting because, we have a survey every year where we examine the Israeli public position regarding foreign policy issues from Kiev to Gaza. And one of the major questions is really about who are the most important countries for Israel to develop relations with. By the way, it's a realpolitik question. Russia always take the lead. This year, for the first time, it lost its leading position to Germany. I mean, after the US, of course. I'm talking about after the US, who is the most important country? Because that's obviously but Canada is rising. The true north is actually moving up slowly. And I think part of it is not related to Israeli-Palestinian. You know what it is related to? Whatever we experienced in the year before the war, with judicial overhaul and with the attempt of liberal Israelis to find examples in the world. This entire discussion about the future of Israel in the club, bless you, in the club of liberal democracies, it's an ongoing, the jury is still out on that. The Rothman and his friends have not forfeited this entire idea of promoting the parts, at least, of this judicial reform, coup d'etat, however you define it. And interestingly enough, it was the Canadian government, in all kinds of levels that actually related to it. They were actually part of a very small group of countries that said, yes, this is not just a domestic Israeli issue. So when we are trying to think about a different type of leadership, emerging leadership in Israel from the liberal camp, and liberal, I don't mean here on a, there's always a question. Yes, exactly. Progressive, maybe we have a problem because we don't, the pro-democratic camp, that's the, that's where we are. And I think that in this case, when we are trying to create those alliances, then the Canadian stands from a good place because of their branding. And I'm not saying it, to everyone when I speak in the UK, you guys are the beacon of, no, really on that level. But it's also about Canada serving. I don't think that we are talking about a standalone position. Yes, Canadian authorities were involved in a number of different reforms, judicial system and others, and they should continue with such a work. But I think that Canada can take a crucial part of this, this slogan of revitalizing the PA from the President Biden's speech. To fill it with content. And I think deradicalization is a major issue. Issues, by the way, involving diaspora investments. Canada is not the only, of course, place, but Palestinian diaspora has not been a factor. You think about Israel and the building of Israel as a nation state. The diaspora had a huge role, and in this case, another interesting role that is a little bit more tailor-made for Canada, for the Canadian authorities. But I would say the most important thing is to be part of this new quartet, to take an active role, not just as an additional state, but as a important participant in trying to do or to promote the practical steps that we discussed right now, whether it is Area C or energy, by the way, green energy right now, when we, this idea of energy independence that is built on renewable energy. All those different capacities, the request is not that Canada would change its nature but will be part of an international coalition and identify its added value within.
And good to know that we have. So I'm going to start taking questions. Let's start with you, Ricky. I can actually see your name tag.
What's your name again? Sorry?
Ricky. I wonder what we're going to do is, why don't you take this and you can pass it on.
Thank you so much, first of all, for everything you've done in terms of helping to create this pragmatic, very practical plan. But I don't understand two things. One is about education, which has caused enormous misunderstandings, to say the least, between the two groups. But I guess overall, how do we get from where we are with this government that you are saying correctly is futile to work with? How do we get from the devastation and all of the incredible trauma on both sides and the government of Israel as it is now? How do we get from here, where we are, to put this beautiful plan, which sounds like a very practical plan, actually into action? I don't see how to get from here to there.
That first step. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go from side to side. So the gentleman over there, and I'm going to take 3 at a time. You're all going to get 2.
Hi, thank you. My name's Elliot. My question is about the green energy, and I'm curious about that water for solar exchange you mentioned, and just the role of environmental diplomacy and environmental international organizations in this. Have they played any role? Do you see a opportunity for more there? Thank you.
We're going to go one online, and the next round will come back. Is a demilitarized state really a state? Okay, go.
Okay. Yeah, I'll start with your question, Ricky, right? First of all, there's an entire phase. I mean, in order for us to even discuss shifting from the warfare situation into the current situation, we're talking about, first of all, the immediate needs. When I speak about humanitarian strategy, this is the starting point. By the way, also related to your question, there's something very interesting about climate change and about humanitarian need. They created an immediate sense of urgency. Regardless if you're from the center or the left in Israel, not the right, but you have to engage with the topic. The actors are already there. The UAE is already involved. The Jordanian, the Americans, the German, the Canadians. We already have the players in motion. There's no political decision that needs to be reached on that level, and you can start from the practice and climb up. But it would never work without a new government. There's a certain restart that would need to be conducted here. That's the healing issue. And I'll also mention another thing that I didn't mention, the hostages. And here I'm going to speak about the Israelis. And I'm sure that you, I mean, through your own activities, you know it very well. But what we are experiencing right now is an ongoing trauma every day. There's no closure. And without it, there's no way to move forward. My PhD is about honor and humiliation, which was mainly the story of the Palestinians. It's still the ongoing story of the Palestinians almost every day. But without reaching that specific closure, you can't move forward. Not with the PA, not with the other actors. It's just an open wound. So I would say that this is the immediate. We have an entire team working with EcoPeace, working with some of the leading experts in Israeli academia about this issue of humanitarian strategy. And that's the immediate thing. That's, for me, is the next couple of months. But the interesting thing about this plan and this modular plan is, while I'm, stretching out 5 years into the future, it is about, it can be implemented starting tomorrow morning. The current steps and the topics that we are discussing, I can share with you and with the people at home. No secrets, you know what, that's the thing. That one of our discussions with the State Department today is about this international peace conference. Those things are not pie in the sky, those are ideas that are already discussed. Some of the practical steps that I mentioned regarding statehood were already adopted by a similar government from the center left. I will even say another thing, and I hope the Israeli public doesn't listen to me right now, but the surveys that I mentioned, for the last 3 years, we were serving the Israeli public on a number of different topics. You ask the Israeli public about two-state solution, you know the score. You get 35, 38%, depends how you ask the question. You ask them about energy independence in the PA, or Area C, or joint mechanism in Jerusalem, between 55 to 65%. support. So what do we have? A split identity? People tend to say that Israelis lost faith in the two-state solution. If you ask me, they lost faith in the big solutions, in this overarching, magic wand kind of historical handshake approach. When you present them with practice, sometimes they don't really understand the meaning of each and every one of those steps. And to be honest, I don't care too much, but I mean, that's where it is in practice, in disability. So, those ideas can be promoted also on the immediate level, not the whole enchilada, not the entire, package, but gradual process. Green energy. Sorry. Yes, of course. One of the major projects that we had at Mitvim before the war, and we're still ongoing, is the idea of eco-political sustainability. The idea that every major action that we take today on the political level has to have an environmental logic, and vice versa. It's not about creating a political framework for environmental action. No. We're talking about a mashup, basically, between those two things. And one of the greatest examples is this Green Blue Prosperity Project. The idea that I mentioned before, a project by the UAE, one of the crown jewels of normalization. Jordan solves its energy problems, its water problems by receiving desalinated water from Israel, supplies what they have, sun, solar energy. The Palestinians are part of it. All terrific. Completely stuck. Why? No political will. Green energy, the thing is that you build those infrastructure, those are for 3, 5, 10, 15 years. You can dismantle them and rebuild them every time a coalition changes. So that's a challenge altogether. But one of the interesting things is that when you speak with Israelis and Palestinians, by the way, about climate, suddenly some of the hostility is suspended. Suddenly you are talking about long-term implications. Suddenly you have the chance, again, temporarily suspending certain obstacles. It doesn't work each time, okay? But there's something unique when we speak about the next generation, almost an excuse to act against political limitations. And I'm really, I'm idealizing all the topic altogether, but that's a chance. And that's why I mentioned the issue of power independence, which is mostly based on local and on RE. Just to throw you, Gaza, about a third of the energy supply before the war was based on solar energy as a necessity, as a response to the, So you can do a lot of interesting things, and we're working with Arava, if you know them, and Ecopeace on those specific plans. And the last question, demilitarized.
Demilitarized state.
Absolutely. I don't see any problem here. I'm not talking about a country who's functioning on the whims and the mercy of Israelis on that level. Absolutely not. Yes, a police force. Yes, a specific a force to protect national security. But I think at least in the first couple of years, it can be demilitarized. But the condition is that the Israelis respect its sovereignty. That it doesn't become a question what you have today of the Lux occupation. The Lux occupation means that the PA is doing the heavy lifting for you, and Israelis would enter area A and B and so on. And this idea of respecting the sovereignty should start, by the way, with this multinational force in Gaza. If it's going to be a multinational force, it will be there. And then the Israelis would enter. That's the demand of the current Israeli government. Israelis could just enter whenever they want. Obviously, the mandate of this force and its ability to act is going to be limited. So I apply the same logic, the concept of the demilitarized Palestinian state. And to be honest, most of the Palestinian negotiators also accept this specific concept today.
Okay, more questions. Okay, David. Someone's coming with the microphone, David.
My name is David Lepovsky. I could listen to you all day. This stuff is fantastic. I want to push you not into the long term, but the very short term to get your thoughts. Up until now, there's been a lot of talk about what will we do on the day after. I want to suggest to you it is the day after for most of Gaza, or it could be, because if the IDF has essentially defeated Hamas in the north and central Gaza and just has not defeated them in the south, then it could be the day after of rebuilding a new Gaza in terms of a new infrastructure. I don't mean buildings, I mean governance, and then buildings, of course. I want to know your thoughts about that. The idea that that the government has no plans for the day after, I get, but what about rethinking it in terms of the day after is already here?
And I'm also talking about a kind of time frame. Oh, Jacqueline Swartz, Peace Now, Toronto. A kind of time frame, you're talking about 2 years, 3 years, more in Israeli time. Right, yes, peace win. But having been to the occupied territories last year, and seeing the boarded up streets of Hebron, seeing the shells of houses in other towns, hearing about the pogroms, essentially, the Biden sanctions aren't enough. How do you stop the land grabs immediately? Because after 2 years, it will be too late. And also, this connects to Palestinians, West Bank Palestinians' attitudes. Why would they be receptive to what you were talking about if they experience more and more and more humiliation and pogroms?
The third question will come from our online participants, which follows on from Jacqueline's actually. How do you de-radicalize Israeli society? How do you make Iran accept Israel as a legitimate state?
2 minutes, go.
I need 20 seconds, kind of.
Not that is not to denigrate the question. Those are important questions. It's just the answers are fiercely complex.
Yeah. Shall I? I mean, because wow, how would you? Yeah. No, let's start with the question about the day after, which is already here, and I completely agree with that. I mean, there's this idea that we are suddenly going to switch from one binary situation to another, from peace to war, 6 o'clock after the war. You know, obviously, by the way, the idea, this kind of a vague situation that we're currently experiencing, also serves the Netanyahu government very well, because they are able to say to the Biden administration, hey, we pulled back we have basically less than a brigade inside Gaza, and today's Republic, the war goes on. And it's not time to change horses in the middle of, you know, and so there's a political intention behind it. But I'll say this, and I agree with you completely about people tend to downplay the achievements, the military, purely military achievements of the IDF in Gaza, with a horrible humanitarian cost, with a horrible human cost, which is still ongoing. But the question is, what do you do with it? Now, we need to define what does it mean to defeat Hamas. Of course, there's a military side to it. And, you know, we're talking about casualties to the level of almost between a third to half of Hamas terrorists being either killed, injured, or captured. But in the end, there's a phase where causing Hamas to collapse is not a military maneuver, but a political maneuver of creating an alternative. And this is not just a complementary part. It's a crucial part, maybe the most important part. Now, where do you see it on the immediate level of, you know, next week, the next couple of weeks? Everybody's talking about humanitarian aid, and we are focusing on the volume of humanitarian aid entering Gaza. You know about the harbor that the Americans are building, which was a Mitvim idea, by the way, a week before, and Biden stole it from us. But, you know, we are completely fine with that. But it's all fine and dandy. The problem is that, you know, the volume of aid is growing, really. But distribution is the major issue. Because once it gets to places like the north part of Gaza, Israel might defeat the battalions of Hamas. Hamas is unable to engage or initiate attacks on Israeli forces, but they still have their control over some of the population. The general control or theoretical control, or the fear of what would happen when the IDF would pull out. And in many cases, they take the humanitarian aid and they apprehend it and they redistribute it to the public. So you basically allow them to control the population through the humanitarian aid. We've seen that in Syria with the Assad regime. There's nothing new about that. And it will continue being the case until you are able to build an administration, a civic administration. That's the part of the multinational forces that does not relate to security. It's about creating that specific alternative. So I think that there are currently the IDF, through this horrible price, enabled Israel, provide the Israeli government with certain, certain opportunities. It's hard to speak about them as opportunities, but interfaces into the future. But the Israeli government refuses to even discuss how to utilize them, and that's the core issue. Second, about your question about how are we going to stop all those negative vectors? Because there is no vacuum. It's not that we decide to implement a plan and a specific the reality is frozen and just waiting for us. Of course not. And that's why I'm talking about certain changes that has to happen immediately, including, and that's a major point of disagreement even inside Mitvim, the last roadmap that we had, if you remember, the one that started in the start of the millennium during the Second Intifada, it was provided the veto power for both sides to either continue or stop. Yeah, that won't going to work. And there's a question if you should provide veto power to the US or to an international, an accepted international group of countries. There's a good question here. And that is meant to serve this exact thing. First, do not do harm while we are trying to build, to create the positive, creating a two-state reality altogether. So that's at least now regarding the Palestinian motivation that you asked about. When I speak about peace of no choice, I'm also speaking about peace of no choice for the Palestinians in the PA, not just the PA, the West Bank. That's what we are hearing for them, because their reality since 7th of October is abysmal. They are losing certain assets and certain, basic assumptions that were there beforehand. So there's also a sense of urgency over there. Yes, you see the surveys that the right wing in Israel is presenting regarding the support of Hamas in the PA, in the West Bank. You always see that during war. That's also what you see in Israel. People answer surveys and they rally around the flag. By the way, it's a matter of honor, and pride. Now I stand strong, and I'm not going to show them through a survey that I'm willing to compromise. So again, I'm simplifying things, but that's more or less where it is. But of course, you need to create a gradual process where Palestinians are experiencing a completely different experience also on the daily basis. And with with different level of involvement by the international community. This is part of it. And by the way, one of the crucial things that you need to do in order to implement it, why do I speak about a different government? Not just because of the general notion or the ideas promoted by it. Smotrich right now and in the last year has changed slowly, step by step, through incremental steps, boring steps, right? The status of certain legal and practical frameworks in the West Bank. And that's the scary part, what the civil servants are doing, when there's no guiding hand, entering this vacuum and changing things on the ground. Last thing about the how to convince Iran to accept Israel, really shortly. We are laughing about it, but my major sources on Iran, I was part of a group that built a think tank in Berlin, which is all about local knowledge, refugees, Syrian, Iraqi, Iranians, former diplomats that defected, former advisors. So my sources are former advisors to the Minister of Defense. It is amazing sometimes to see how this mirror image of Israel that exists in Iran, about an Israeli threat, about intervention. So no, I don't buy it completely. I don't think that Iran is a status quo actor, just misunderstood, basically focusing on deterrence and wanting nothing more. No, I don't accept this specific idea. But when we spoke with a number of Gulf countries in our engagements, the idea of some kind of a third party not negotiations, but facilitations of a constructive dialogue, a little bit post-Cuban missile crisis, or maybe not a red line between the countries, but, through a third party, is something that is not completely science fiction, especially because if you consider the major cost for both countries in continuing this conflict, then there's something interesting there. To add to that, if Iran faces stronger US involvement in international involvement, combined with what I mentioned before, maybe even Chinese involvement, China, and Iran are talking about $200 billion of the future of Iranian economy in the next 30 years, then you can create a mechanism that, again, would not completely omit the Iranians and their own interests, domestic and foreign, but at least put it at bay. And again, this is really not even $72,000, a $1,000 answer for this very important question.
So we're up to 1 million. I think our time is just about up, right, Ben? Yeah. So I encourage you to continue the discussion, and I'm sure you'll all be seeking out Gil to continue our dialogue and our discussion. And I do recommend you read the report, their initiative. It's quite it's so, you talk about there being emotion. I've lived in such an emotional space for the last 6 months. It was wonderful to read something that had humanity but intense logic too. That felt like a way forward. So let's hope. So I want to thank you all, and Gil, thank you so much for your knowledge and sharing it, and your efforts to find a way to hope and a future. So we are about to come up to a coffee break, and as I say, I encourage you to continue our discussion. And there is also, for those of you like me who didn't even think about lunch, there is a small cafeteria just outside this area, which has food and drink for sale. Imagine a Jewish event with no food, but here we are, right? It's the times. Thank you all so much, Gil. Thank you again. And we'll keep talking.